The usually white snow on the night of February 16th, 2002 turned crimson. A police officer who was inspecting the area near the Furmanov railway station discovered late at night a girl lying on the snow with a fractured skull, frozen in an unnatural position. Just 100 meters from the first pool of blood, the mutilated bodies of two more girls were lying on the snow. They were killed with incredible cruelty. On the body of one of them, experts counted 32 wounds, and on the other, 28. The police officer shuddered because in all his years of service he had never encountered anything like this before. December 22nd, 1973, in the village of Mikhalkovo, winter had long since settled in. Near the snow-covered paths, there are large snowdrifts, and in the air you can feel the scent of the frosty wind. Garlands are twinkling in the windows of the Khrushchev-era apartment blocks. Everyone has already decorated their homes and apartments, put up Christmas trees, and are waiting for the new year. On this day, a boy was born in the maternity hospital, and he would be named Kolya Nikolai Dudin. He has just been born and doesn't yet know what a terrible and bloody childhood awaits him. It's the year 1978. Nikolai was already 5 years old when, waking up early one morning, he went straight to the kitchen. His mother was bustling around the stove making him breakfast. Whenever he looked up at her, he felt happy and warm inside. His mother was the one person who would always listen, support, and hug him. Mom. The boy loved her very much. She put a plate in front of him, and although the food was delicious, Kolya was in a hurry. He couldn't wait to run outside and play. Suddenly the front door creaked, and Arkady walked into the kitchen. Kolya's father had returned from the night shift. He gave the boy an indifferent, tired look, and, without saying a word, headed to another room. A chill ran through Kolya's body, and his heart tightened with fear. His father was cruel, and this cruelty was not only towards him, but also towards his brother and his mother. In his mind, even though he tried in every way to forget these traumatic situations, fragments of memories would periodically surface about how his father, when drunk, would beat him and beat his mother. It happened so often that Nikolai, even at such a young age, began to hate and fear his father. Kolya finished his breakfast, his thoughts occupied with the upcoming meeting. He couldn't wait to rush outside. He quickly put on his jacket, laced up his sneakers, and within seconds the heavy front door slammed shut behind him. Kolya stood on the porch, a cool wind blowing in his face. All around were trees already covered in bright green leaves. He was happy and quickly headed toward his friend. His most loyal and beloved dog was waiting for him. His best friend always waited for him in the backyard near the old apple tree in his doghouse. They were inseparable. Nikolai loved spending time with his dog. They ran together and played with a ball. The boy even taught the dog some commands. Kolya loved his cute face, adored playing with him, and enjoyed watching the dog happily greet him and wag his tail. That day, everything started just as well. Kolya ran up to the doghouse and the dog whined happily and started jumping around. The boy unfastened the chain. They started having fun, running around the yard. The whole world seemed bright and kind. But suddenly this joyful atmosphere vanished in an instant. His father silently came down onto the porch. His face was grim and expressionless, and he was holding an old hunting gun in his hands. Nikolai, seeing such a device in his father's hands, didn't even have time to realize what he was about to do. But overall he knew what a rifle was used for, which made his panic reach its peak. A moment later, a deafening shot rang out, echoing in Kolya's ears. The dog, who had just been jumping with joy, fell to the ground, and a red stain spread beneath him. Kolya froze in shock, staring at the motionless body of his dog. Suddenly the boy fell to the ground and began to sob, covering his eyes with his hands. He couldn't believe that this had just happened to him, that his dog whom he loved so much was gone. He would never play with him again, never admire his fur shimmering in the sunlight, never look into his cheerful, lively eyes again. But at that moment, his father came up to him and started holding his hands, forcing him, making him do it. After a few minutes, when Kolya had calmed down a bit and realized what was happening, a surge of rage flared up inside him. But he knew that he wouldn't be able to stand up to his father, and all he could do was go home to his mom and try to calm down. A few months later, the boy still couldn't accept this fact. He couldn't forgive his father. He didn't know yet that even when he grew up, this situation would still remain a heavy burden on his shoulders. One day, his father came up to him and asked for help. The boy followed him, heading to the shed where various animals were kept, including calves. Suddenly, his father stopped and told Nikolai to go in alone, saying he would grab something and come back. A few minutes later, his father did come back, but this time he was holding an axe. His father started slaughtering and Kolya couldn't bear to watch, but his dad, seeing that the boy was scared and sickened by the sight of blood, didn't even think about stopping. On the contrary, he mocked Kolya, calling him a weakling and a crybaby. Later, he would deliberately ask him to help butcher the carcasses of domestic animals. His father actually believed that this was exactly how boys should be raised, so that his son would grow up to be a real man, but he had no idea that these methods would later turn against him. Such bloody situations happened so often that Kolya was already getting used to the cruelty. This kind of thing had already become part of his daily routine. He had already learned to calmly watch his father's actions. Blood no longer horrified him, and his pity for helpless creatures gradually disappeared. Kolya learned how to use sharp objects and how the body is structured. And now Kolya is already 13, he's in 7th grade. He couldn't be called an attractive teenager. He was hunched, short, wore glasses, and had unclear speech. Because of his appearance, he often became the target of ridicule. He showed no interest in studying and mostly did poorly in school. And then, on December 3rd, 1984, it's getting close to New Year's. Despite the upcoming holidays, Kolya comes home from school in a terrible mood. At school, the day went badly as usual. He heard a lot of mockery and insults directed at him. He had long grown tired of it, but once again he couldn't stand up for himself and had no choice but to endure it and bottle up his anger. Kolya had no idea that today would be a turning point in his life. The teenager came home, dropped his backpack and headed to his room. As he walked past the kitchen, his father started shouting incoherently, telling him to come over. Nikolai had seen his father drunk and with a bottle of vodka in his hand more times than he could count. "So what? The quarter is almost over. Show me your grades." Kolya, after a short silence, reluctantly put his school record book on the table. He already knew what would happen next, and when his father sees his terrible grades. Arkady glanced through the columns, flipped through the pages, and saw a lot of red scribbles, and almost every day there were remarks about his behavior. He closed and put aside the school record book, sighed heavily, stood up, and walked over to Nikolai. As he walked, he grabbed a pot from the stove and started hitting Kolya with it. Hearing the screams, their mother ran out and tried to pull their father away, but she wasn't strong enough and she got hit by him too. Things like this happened often in their family. This incident was no exception. But this time, while his father was beating him, something snapped inside Kolya. All school year he endured insults and bullying from his classmates and suffered humiliation and violence from his father. With every second, uncontrollable rage was building up inside Kolya, and then he made a decision for himself. Today I will take revenge on him for all these years of humiliation. In the evening, Kolya came up with a plan. He knew where the weapon was kept, and he was also very skilled at handling it. His father constantly took him hunting and taught him. Kolya waited until his father fell asleep. Hearing the characteristic snoring, he realized it was time to begin. Leaving his room, Kolya headed to the living room where his father was sleeping. On the way, he grabbed the rifle he had hidden behind the door beforehand. Very quietly and silently, Kolya came right up to his sleeping father. He lifted the heavy weapon and with a slightly trembling finger cocked the gun. Then he grabbed the pillow lying nearby and carefully pressed it to his father's head. He placed the barrel to the head through the pillow and pulled the trigger. A muffled shot rang out. The pillow absorbed part of the sound's energy. At that moment, Kolya didn't feel any pity for his father at all, only relief and some strange feeling. But overall, he liked the feeling. He liked that his father finally got what he deserved for his mother's tears, for the death of his beloved dog, for a traumatic childhood. Kolya heard footsteps. It was his mom. He quickly tossed aside the torn pillow. He covered the body with a blanket and hurried off to his room with the rifle. He threw it behind the door, got into bed, and pretended to be asleep. Mom, half asleep, thought she imagined it and went back to bed. A few hours later, the teenager, surprisingly quietly, dragged his father outside, hauled the body to an abandoned well, threw it in, and covered it with trash. The next day, Kolya told the family that their father had left early in the morning and hadn't come back. Maybe his mother suspected something, but she still chose to believe her son's story and simply accepted the father's disappearance with relief. Exactly 1 year has passed since that day. Kolya is already 14. A year has passed and no one has come for him. No one knocked on the door, no one put him in handcuffs, no one asked any questions. The police couldn't find Nikolai at all. For him, this became the main proof of his superiority. If they didn't catch him immediately, they'll never catch him. The fear that at first made him flinch at every rustle had completely disappeared. It was replaced by an unshakable confidence. He had taken the most terrifying step a person can take and the world didn't collapse. The sun kept shining, the grass kept growing, and he kept breathing and walking on this earth. He came to a simple but terrifying conclusion. Laws are written for the weak and the foolish. He was above that. A clear conviction formed in his mind. If you're brave enough and know how to hide, you can do anything. Kolya no longer had to endure insults or even the slightest disrespect. The situation at home got much worse. His mother, who used to be able to yell at him or make him do his homework, had now turned into a frightened servant. She intuitively sensed the danger coming from her son. Every time she tried to be strict, he would just silently look at her, and in that look she saw terrifying aggression. It was as if she saw that indifference and cold-bloodedness in his eyes. She saw that deadly calm on his face. She saw a harshness and audacity in his movements that made her blood run cold. He stopped caring about her opinion. If he wanted, he would leave for the whole night. If he wanted, he wouldn't come back for a day. He realized that in this house he was no longer a child, but the master who set the rules. His mother was just an obstacle whom he tolerated only because she took care of him and overall was still someone close to him. Outside, his behavior changed even more. He used to be quiet and unnoticed. He tried not to attract attention. Now, however, he walked around showing everyone that he was no longer afraid of anything. He stopped avoiding groups of noisy peers or drunk adults. Now they would find themselves stepping aside for him, sensing the heavy dark energy coming off him. He started spending long periods walking in places that normal people avoid, wastelands, abandoned construction sites, dark alleyways. But he wasn't afraid of becoming a victim there. On the contrary, he was the one hunting. He would watch passers-by for hours, assessing their vulnerability. And then, 1988.
88.
Another day in Furmanov was ending as usual. Kolya was coming home from school. Suddenly, he noticed a familiar jacket ahead. It was his classmate. The very one who never missed a chance to tease him or laugh with everyone else at his appearance. Something snapped inside Kolya. The fear of constant mockery suddenly turned into rage. He knew perfectly well which route she took every day, so he just followed her, trying not to make any noise. He kept his distance, trying to make sure she didn't notice him. The girl walked calmly ahead, unaware of any danger, just wanting to get home as soon as possible. When they were far enough from the noisy streets and the place became deserted, Kolya realized the time had come. There was no point in screaming here, and he quickened his pace, catching up with his victim. Kolya didn't try to talk to her. Grabbing the girl by the neck, he began to threaten her, angrily recalling the times when she had mocked him. After that, he brutally beat the girl and sexually assaulted her, and for the second time in his life he felt that same sense of satisfaction. He enjoyed taking revenge and feeling absolute power over those who used to bully him. He thought he would get away with it again, that maybe he wouldn't get caught like before, but the police caught him almost instantly. The victim was his classmate, so she immediately told them everything and identified him. The police officers didn't even think that this interrogation would become a real sensation for them. While answering the investigators' questions in the office, Nikolai suddenly shouted, "Hey, what? Why don't you ask where my father is?" The investigators were surprised. After that, Kolya began to describe in detail how he shot his father with a sawed-off gun, threw the body into an abandoned well and covered it with trash. Before that, Arkady Dudin was considered missing. Kolya, vividly recounting the details, talked about it as if he was proud that he had fooled everyone while the police couldn't find the missing person. A few hours later, the investigative team was already standing at that very abandoned well. There they really did find the remains of Arkady Dudin, his father. Although Dudin confessed to taking a life, he could not be held responsible for his father's death because he was only 13 at the time of the crime. He received his first 7-year sentence solely for sexually assaulting a classmate. The penal colony, of course, did not reform Dudin. From the very first days, he showed that he had no intention of quietly serving his sentence. While other inmates tried to behave calmly to get out on parole, Nikolai was aggressive and seemed to be looking for a reason to vent the anger he had accumulated over the years. From prison, he wrote many complaints and letters that contained plans for organizing riots. And from some of the letters you can tell that Nikolai considered the administration his personal enemies and hated them. Well, actually, it seems like nobody really likes them in prisons anyway. But he also constantly clashed with other inmates and was rude to the guards. He couldn't control his aggression, and one day he went too far. Instead of serving his sentence, he started inciting other inmates to riot. When that didn't work, he decided to escape, but he was caught. The most outrageous thing he did was attack a guard. Dudin didn't just resist. He tried to take a man's life using a homemade weapon, a shiv. For all these antics, the court kept adding years to his sentence, so his 7 years turned into 12. He spent almost all that time in punishment cells and solitary confinement, alone and in the cold, but that only fueled his rage. When he was finally released in '99, he was already a different person. All those long years behind bars turned him into a man with a completely broken psyche and incredible aggression. Terrible years awaited the residents of Ivanovo Oblast because he returned to these parts not to start a new life but to continue hunting people. The evening of February 15, 2002 in Fomanov began with a brutal robbery. On a dark street, an unknown person attacked a 42-year-old woman. The criminal smashed her head to take her bag and wallet, then disappeared, leaving the victim on the cold snow. Just a couple of hours later, 2 friends were walking nearby. It was already past midnight, about 1 in the morning. Near a L night convenience store, the drunk Kolya Dudin meets 2 women. The ladies are also drunk, cheerful and relaxed. And so Dudin, being quite tipsy and bold, decided to get acquainted with them. They started talking. The women said that today they played the role of matchmakers, helped a friend find a partner, and introduced her to a man. This exciting affair was accompanied by a feast. After several hours and some fun, the matchmakers decided it was time to let the couple be alone. And they left the apartment to take a walk, while their friend and her suitor continued their evening. At that moment, Dudin noticed them strolling along without a care. He tried to start a conversation and showed interest. But the women, being a bit tipsy and elated by the successful matchmaking, treated the stranger with disdain and looked down on him. They were clearly not interested in meeting anyone, at least not him. During the conversation, one of the women noticed the tattoo on Nikolai's arm. She rudely said that she didn't want to talk to a convict. Her friend backed her up with some snide remarks. Such contempt and insult struck drunk Dudin right in the heart. Something snapped in his head. The sudden hurt turned into a fit of monstrous, inhuman rage. He couldn't stand the insult. In a state of intense anger, he pulled out a knife and lunged. He directed it at the women. It was a frenzy. It was a horrific slaughter. He stabbed them over and over with a kitchen knife. On the body of one victim, experts counted 32 wounds. On the other, 28. And after that, Nikolai, taking their groceries, went home, where he snacked and drank in good spirits with his friends. That same night, the police officer who was inspecting the area after the first attack discovered another terrifying find. Just 100 meters from the first pool of blood, the bodies of those very girls were lying in the snow. This episode was at the start of the video. This ordinary-looking man in glasses was constantly keeping track of everyone who had wronged him. You might have been rude to him in a store and forgotten about it 5 minutes later. Nikolai, on the other hand, would replay your words in his mind for several days in a row, thinking and imagining in detail how he would exact revenge on you. And after that, he wouldn't feel any pity except for himself, and would see what he'd done as setting things right.
Окружающих.
After the triple murder, the city was quiet for 2.5 months. And on May Day, the young woman from Furmanov, Irina Kolodina, meets some guy and without any worries goes to visit him. No one ever saw her alive again. And on June 4th, Tanya Gryaznova, a student at the Ivanovo Medical Academy, meets a pleasant man of about 30 on the bridge over the Shaka River in Furmanov, who asks her out on a date. After passing another exam at the academy, she rushes home to Furmanov. In the evening, she is seen with the man at a cafe, and the next morning her relatives can't reach either Tanya or her grandmother, who lives with Tanya in the same apartment. Tanya's mother and a neighbor, after breaking the lock, were the first to see the body mutilated by a knife. The mind of a woman who was healthy until that day. After what she saw, the woman suffered such a severe breakdown that due to her serious condition, she was unable to participate in the trial. The townspeople began to escort each other to and from work and lock themselves in and bolt every door. The police checked for involvement in the murders among local mentally ill people, Afghan war veterans, Chechen war veterans, young men discharged from the army, recently released prisoners, and newcomers to the town. Dudin also came to the attention of law enforcement. Now a little bit about the incident involving Irina Kolodina. On May 1st, 2002, she came to visit Nikolai Dudin when no one else was home. That evening started off calmly and even cozily. Music was playing, they sat together, chatted and joked. It seemed like an ordinary evening for two young people who enjoyed each other's company. Ira felt safe, not suspecting what kind of person was actually sitting in front of her. The conversation was going on as usual until the girl let slip a certain phrase. She didn't mean to offend him, it was just an unfortunate joke or something true he didn't like. Nevertheless, for Dudin, any random rude word sounded like a declaration of war. He was always painfully proud and believed that the world should revolve around him. In his mind, this minor offense instantly blew up to the scale of the universe. His face changed, his gaze became cold, but Ira probably didn't even have time to get scared. Everything happened too quickly. Not even an hour had passed since they were peacefully listening to music and Ira was already dead. Nikolai slit her throat. There wasn't a drop of pity or remorse in him, only anger and the desire to get rid of the one who had humiliated him. When it was all over, he quickly started hiding the evidence as if following a set of instructions. First, he calmly took off all the gold jewelry, earrings that sparkled in the lamplight, rings, thin chains. He simply put them in his pocket, considering them his rightful loot. Then he brought 2 large black bags and calmly packed the body into them, trying not to dirty anything in the house. Night fell and it became quiet outside. Kolya rolled out his old bicycle, tied the bags to it, and rode out of the city. He pedaled along the dark roads, past sleeping houses, carrying a terrifying load behind him. The gold jewelry that Ira had, chains, rings, earrings, Nikolai took all of it for himself. As the court later determined, he disposed of these items at his own discretion. Most likely he sold or exchanged them. But another outrageous example of complete criminal absurdity is the murder of the Polozov family. This massacre became one of the most gruesome chapters in the case of Nikolai Dudin. What started as a foolish accident ended with the death of an entire family. This terrible event happened on May 8th, about a week after the killing of Ira Kolodina. Drunk Kolya was walking around the city with a sawed-off shotgun hidden under his jacket. When he needed to pee, he went up to some fence, swayed, and knocked it over with his weight. And suddenly he heard shouts from the garden. "Why are you breaking my fence?" "Hey, put the fence back right now before I call the cops." Andrei, who was shouting, still didn't know what kind of person he was dealing with. He just wanted to protect his home and his sense of order from a random troublemaker. For Nikolai Dudin, who endured humiliation from his father as a child, any dismissive or harsh tone hit a nerve, as you can imagine. And the mention of the police only added more emotion because Nikolai had experience with prison and he hated law enforcement officers. He didn't want to end up behind bars again and believed that any threat to turn him into the authorities should be punished by death. That's why, in a fit of aggression, Nikolai grabbed a sawed-off shotgun and shot Polozov in the head. But he decided that simply taking his life wasn't enough for such blatant disrespect. He wanted to prove his strength, to trample everything that was dear to this man. He decided to drag the body into the house and at the same time see if there was a family inside. When he was already standing in front of the house with the body, an elderly woman came out to him, Andrei's mother-in-law. When she saw this scene, she got scared and tried to run away, but due to her old age, she didn't even manage to take a few steps. Dudin shot her almost point blank with a sawed-off shotgun. There was also Andrei Polozov's daughter in the house. She was 11 years old. She ran out at the sound, and when she saw her grandmother lying on the floor in a pool of blood, she started screaming in terror. But Nikolai Dudin showed her no mercy, he only got even angrier. He walked up to her, grabbed her by the head and slit her throat. When she was already dead, in a fit of rage toward her father, he started stabbing her all over her body with all his strength, and in the end, he plunged the knife into her back, leaving the body in such a mutilated state. It seemed to him that this way he had finally taken revenge for the insulting word drunkard. After walking around the house, he found a box of matches on the stove. To cover his tracks, he went outside and set the house on fire. When he left, he didn't even look back at the burning house in which an entire family perished in an instant. After this terrible crime, Nikolai carefully cleaned himself up. And also, as soon as he crossed the threshold of his home, the first thing Nikolai did was go to the bathroom to carefully wash away the traces. A pleasant smell came from the kitchen. His girlfriend was cooking rich borscht. It seemed like there was real love between them. They were even expecting a child, but behind closed doors their relationship had long since gone bad. Nikolai didn't want to work, often disappeared with his friends and drank, leaving all the responsibilities to Elena. "Kolya, come have dinner," she called. Her voice sounded firm. She couldn't live like this anymore. When he came in, she looked him in the eyes and said she was leaving. She told him the saddest thing of all. Recently, she had secretly had an abortion because she didn't want to raise the child of a man who was spiraling downward. Rage flared up in Nikolai instantly. He wasn't going to let her go. Nikolai lunged at the girl, and the peaceful kitchen turned into a battleground. Elena miraculously managed to fight him off and dart out the door. She ran without looking back, erasing him from her life forever. On the day Nikolai took the life of his last victim, his girlfriend Elena was in the hospital. Dudin tracked her down and brutally beat her, unable to forgive her for making that decision without his consent. Nikolai Dudin's last crime took place on the night of between July 16th and 17th, 2002 in the city of Furmanov. At night, while the city slept, Nikolai believed everything was on track. He approached the house of the lonely pensioner Valentina Sundukova. At that time she was watching TV. Nikolai knocked loudly and insistently on the door. "Open up, this is riot police. There's a criminal hiding in your house." The woman reacted immediately, ran to the phone and called the real police. She didn't know that Nikolai was already in her house. While she was talking on the phone, he snuck up behind her and hit the elderly woman on the head with a saber as hard as he could. But Nikolai didn't know that his victim had an incredible will to live. Bleeding and in terrible pain, she found the strength not to lose consciousness. While Dudin froze in the room deciding what to steal, the elderly woman rushed to the front door. She ran out into the stairwell, slammed the door shut and turned the key in the lock twice. The maniac was trapped. He tried to break down the door, rushed to the windows, but the front door was heavy and thick. Because of the unexpected turn of events, the noise, the woman's resistance, her escape, Nikolai panicked. Her desperate screams had already been heard by the neighbors. As a result, Nikolai was taken away by the police. When Dudin was apprehended, they found a backpack, a rifle, and a homemade saber. While they were driving in the car, Dudin was shouting that he was drunk and had simply gotten the wrong house. Even after he was caught almost immediately, he kept insisting that he was a decent and law-abiding person. And immediately after being detained, he wrote a confession. He did confess to the crimes, but in between he rambled on with unrelated nonsense about injustice and resentment. During interrogations, Dudin often complained about life and kept repeating the phrase, "I feel hurt, you understand. Everything is unfair to me. This city, the people, the way they look at me, their unfriendliness." Later, an examination would determine that Nikolai Dudin was fully sane, but his logic was extremely distorted. He had a notebook where he wrote down his grievances. His world was divided into himself, the good one, and those around him, who were rude and evil. Investigators recalled that working with him was difficult and emotionally draining. Dudin could talk for hours about morality, about how important it is to be polite, and a minute later describe how he delivered fatal blows to a person over a random word. He felt no pity for the victims, only pity for himself, misunderstood and insulted. Basically, Nikolai Dudin is a resentful avenger with a rigid psyche. His personality type apparently is paranoid epileptoid with antisocial traits. The mechanism of his crimes is simple. Resentment, retaliation. The key traits, of course, were formed in childhood and solidified in prison. The main trait is being extremely easily offended. Any word, even one that can be more or less interpreted as an insult, is perceived that way. And for an insult, the offender must die. The notebook of grievances, literally a death note, literally a record of enemies. At the same time, Nikolai probably lacked empathy completely, but he was highly sensitive. He only felt pity for himself, misunderstood and offended. But the suffering of the victims did not cause any hesitation. After taking the lives of an entire family, he calmly had dinner and washed his hands. Although the crimes outwardly looked like they were committed in a fit of passion, it seems that he took lives in a state of cold rage. Multiple stab wounds indicate not so much passion but rather the need to completely destroy the offender. Another trait of Cherta Dudin apparently is his belief in his own impunity. After the incident with his father and the lack of punishment, a mindset took shape. If they didn't catch me right away, they'll never catch me. And then there's the prison hardening. He didn't break while incarcerated. On the contrary, he learned to be even more violent and tried to organize riots. The 12-year sentence didn't make him safer, it made him more dangerous. The fact that during interrogations he could spend hours talking about politeness and morality and then immediately describe taking a life, that's not insanity as one might think, it's more like defensive rhetoric. He truly believed he was good and the world was evil. Nikolai Dudin is most likely, of course, beyond rehabilitation. If he were hypothetically released, he would almost certainly become a repeat offender. Father Dima Torzok, subtitles Dima Torzok, he would almost certainly become a repeat offender. Nikolai's father is also, of course, quite a piece of work. One could assume that he is a dissocial type with sadistic tendencies. In general, Arkady Dudin is most likely the one who most likely made Nikolai Dudin into a maniac. Without his involvement, Nikolai would most likely have just remained a troubled teenager. Nikolai's mother seems to be a passive witness. Most likely she is a dependent, traumatized, and oppressed woman. In general, she is a typical figure in criminal families, a silent accomplice through inaction. She never offered an alternative moral framework and didn't stand up to either her son or her husband. Well, I've talked about how to recognize a paranoid epileptoid personality in my Telegram channel. The link is below the video. When Nikolai Dudin was taken to crime scene reconstructions, the residents of Furmanov were ready to tear him apart. The riot police had to form a tight security cordon. People couldn't believe that this unremarkable quiet man was a terrifying maniac who had taken the lives of 13 people. In 2003 the trial took place. There was more than enough evidence. The testimony of the survivor Sundukova, personal confessions, discovered evidence, and biological traces. The verdict was obvious: life imprisonment. Dudin was sent to one of the strictest penal colonies in the country, White Swan in Solikamsk. This is a place for those who have no way back to society. The most dangerous criminals are gathered here. They say that over the years in prison, Nikolai Dudin has changed a lot. He looks older, thinner, and there's no trace left of his former arrogance. In the colony, he keeps a low profile. Maniacs like him are at the bottom of the prison hierarchy, so he tries not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. He still believes that fate has treated him unfairly. Valentina Sundukova, the woman who wasn't afraid to go up against the maniac even while wounded, became a local heroine. Her feat is a reminder that even the most terrifying beast can be stopped by an ordinary elderly person who had the courage to turn the key in the lock. And here's another bonus case. It's unlikely you've heard about it. That night in 1986 in the city of Oryol, one of the women in an apartment building on Novoselskaya Street was peacefully sleeping in her bed. Suddenly her eyes opened and she froze in fear. Piercing screams were coming from somewhere nearby. It seemed like they were coming from the neighboring apartment. The walls of the room were rattling as if a drill were boring through them. The screams grew louder and louder, and her strength to endure this acoustic torture was running out. The woman sat up on the bed, letting her legs hang down, and covered her ears. Even so, she couldn't completely shield herself from the terrible sound. For a whole 15 minutes her palms pressed in vain against her temples, and then suddenly everything went quiet. The woman calmed down, lay back down in a comfortable position, covered herself with a blanket, and grumbling about her utterly shameless neighbors, didn't notice how she fell asleep again. All the windows in the house on Novoselskaya Street turned black, like empty eye sockets. The residents of Oryol were still far from waking up. On one of the dark winter days, both sunny and frosty at the same time, a girl was wandering through the streets of Oryol. Without a coat, her hands trembled and her face and clothes were streaked with blood. With a pleading look, she stopped random passers-by, clearly trying to draw attention to her unfortunate situation, but they dismissively waved her off, as if to say she was out of her mind. The blood had dried on her cheeks and chin in strange streaks. The girl walked and cried, unable to find in the cold eyes of the passers-by even a hopeful glimmer like the glint of the snow all around her. In the end, her tears led her to the city bridge. The girl climbed onto it and gripped the railing with her frozen hands, her head automatically tilted downward. She thought about letting go and falling since no one would feel sorry for her anyway. These thoughts were interrupted by someone's voice which loudly called out to her. An energetic young man ran up to the stranger who was about to end her life. He offered her his jacket, gently hugged her, and comforted her. The other residents of Oryol went on with their business as if nothing had happened, and soon the image of the mysterious, bloodied girl faded from the memory of those who had seen her. For the third time, the peace of one of the houses in Oryol was disturbed by sudden screams. Female screams, of course. The sounds of a struggle pierced the air and reached every stair landing. The neighbors all heard it, but did nothing. Maybe it was just a family quarrel. Anything can happen. When the screams stopped, the attention of the residents of Oryol who lived in that building probably shifted from the outside world back to themselves and their own pile of everyday problems. The odd scuffles inside the building were forgotten. The thing is, all three situations were actually a real nightmare, and ignoring them was not just cruel but dangerous. Dangerous for all the women of Oryol. The first time, the woman who covered her ears, wanting to no longer hear the sounds coming from the neighboring apartment, made a mistake by blaming it all on the neighbor's rudeness. The girl in the next apartment, Yelena Butorina, was subjected to various tortures. She was stripped and sexually assaulted, but that was only the beginning of the torture the criminals had planned. Already exhausted, Yelena had her hair cut off, then they poured a whole bottle of fragrant perfume into her mouth, and in the end they pulled out a volunteer patrol ID from somewhere and forced the girl to chew it. Her hands and feet were tied with straps from a lady's handbag. To complete the abuse, they wrapped a rope around the girl's neck and tied her to the door handle. Then the heart-wrenching screams finally stopped. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's censorship, I can't show some documentary materials, so I'll leave them in the Telegram channel Strashnoti. Go ahead, subscribe and watch. The link is below the video. The sister of the deceased, after inspecting her apartment, stated that someone took away gold jewelry and 300 rubles which Yelena had saved up in hopes of buying a new sofa. Some things disappeared from under the wardrobe, and then, seeing an electronic toy lying in the old dresser, the unknown individuals took that with them as well. The second time, a girl named Valentina, who was hopelessly wandering the streets of Oryol alone with her problem and almost jumped off a bridge, had actually run away from her tormentors. The girl's friend, who was also her guardian angel, went to the police so that this situation would not go unnoticed. He felt sorry for his friend, and besides, who knows, there might be new victims. The police officers just rolled their eyes skeptically at his sudden visits and said, "Young man, please leave the premises." He left without achieving anything, and after some time, a new crime occurred. While the neighbors indifferently shrugged their shoulders and exchanged glances because of the loud screams, Larisa Kasatonova, a police officer and the wife of an operative with the special commandant's office, was dying in one of the apartments. The exact same thing happened to her as to Elena Buturina. She was assaulted, her hands and feet were tied, and she was left convulsing with a rope stretched from her neck to the door handle. Even the knot was exactly the same as last time. Money, gold jewelry, and unexpectedly, books disappeared from the Kasatonovs' apartment. Volumes of selected works by Russian and foreign classics vanished without a trace. Larisa Kasatonova's body appeared to be covered in blood. The liquid had dried in thin streaks on her head and neck, limbs, abdomen, and chest. However, all three women involved in the series of strange crimes in Oryol actually did not receive a single open wound. The bodies were doused with red Raduga 2 ink, which was used to refill fountain pens. This was a kind of calling card for the criminals. The police officers had to rely on statements from the sister of the first victim of the maniacs, Yelena Buturina. It was from her that they learned. Shortly before the tragedy, the girl met a student who introduced himself as Zora. He was poor, had come from Leningrad and barely had enough money to live on. Caring Yelena felt sorry for him and even invited him to her home, offering him a cup of tea. The investigators immediately set out to search for the mysterious Zora. There were plenty of Zoras in Oryol, more than enough, but which one was the criminal? A painstaking and lengthy investigation lay ahead. The first to fall under suspicion was Georgy Ostudin, a student at the Leningrad Institute of Finance and Economics. Detective Komarov paid a visit to his parents. In the living room, sitting right on the carpet with an electronic toy in his hands, was Ostudin's younger brother. This made the investigator suspicious because an item similar to this had been stolen from Elena Buturina's apartment. When Komarov asked the boy where he got the toy, he calmly replied that his brother Zhora had given it to him. From that moment on, Ostudin was put under surveillance. He turned out to be a very suspicious person, and indeed, it soon became clear that the guy had sticky fingers. He was involved in theft, collecting scarce radio components, electrical appliances, and primitive gaming devices in order to sell all of this for good money later. But he had nothing to do with any of the murdered women. In the case of Larisa Kasatonova, the suspects turned out to be her husband and father-in-law. They all lived together in an atmosphere of scandals and misunderstandings. The husband and wife were incompatible, and that's why family life turned into a real nightmare for each of them. On the day of the tragedy, Mikhail Kasatonov, Larisa's husband, stayed late at work, as did his father. This seemed unusual. Neither of them had any reason to stay late. The suspects were taken into custody. However, they had to be released very soon because the Kasatonovs turned out to be uninvolved in the crime. Soon there was a breakthrough in the case. A woman who was in the yard of Larisa's house just minutes before the tragedy told the police that she saw two suspicious guys. Based on her description, they created a composite sketch of one of them. No distinctive features. A young face, about 20 years old, an ordinary guy from Oryol like many others. How could they find him? Suddenly the woman added something. It seems they were from the telephone station, at least they said something about a shared line device. In Soviet times, everyone dreamed of getting rid of the shared line device, which automatically limited several neighbors to a single line if one of them wanted to chat on the phone. Larisa Kasatonova was no exception. On that tragic day, some technicians visited her, promising to deal with the hated device. However, apparently, they turned out to be fake technicians. After 3 mysterious incidents that shocked Oryol, people panicked. Now, everyone seems suspicious. Anyone who was hanging around the building entrance or walking down the street looking for who knows what. The police received a lot of calls. Anxious voices kept reporting, "It seems it's them." However, this excitement and activity did nothing to displace the usual indifference. One day in the central part of the city, people were going about their business as usual. 2 young men and a girl were also heading somewhere. The trio looked strange. The girl walked in the middle with the guys on either side of her. The assumption that this was just an ordinary walk could be completely ruled out. The girl's companions were holding her by the arms, but so firmly and even roughly that it was immediately clear. If they let her go, she would run away at once. None of the passers-by paid attention to them, which was a mistake. After some time, the body of Olga Shkalikova, who had come to Oryol from Ryazan, would be found on the street with her hands and feet tied and covered in red ink. Who were her companions and where could they be found? Fortunately for the police, everything resolved itself. One day, a girl about 18 years old came to the Almaz jewelry store, located in the center of Oryol, and offered to show the staff her valuables. 2 rings, gold with hefty stones. The detectives who were on duty on almost every street in Oryol were here as well. The girl caught their attention. They started asking her where she got those pieces of jewelry. She immediately felt some confusion, started beating around the bush, said her aunt gave them to her, she found them, she bought them a long time ago, but then she suddenly confessed, "The guys gave me these rings." The investigators became interested. Who are these guys and where are they? It turned out apparently they were standing outside waiting for their friend. These are new suspects, but catching them right away, rushing in immediately is not a good idea. We need to act gradually so they don't suspect anything. The police officers sent the girl outside and told her to tell her friends that the jewelry wasn't accepted because it was fake. The instructions were strict. Don't make any sudden moves, behave naturally. While the girl was complaining to the guys about the situation, the detectives quietly snuck up and caught them. In one of their pockets, they found a small box with a gold bracelet and mysterious initials, LK. The initials stopped being mysterious when it turned out that the former owner of the item was Larisa Kasatonova. The young men were arrested. They turned out to be 21-year-old Igor Silkin and 22-year-old Georgy Strogaliev, the very same poor student Zora who gained Elena Buturina's trust. His apartment looked like a huge library. His mother, the city's chief architect, managed to instill in her son a love of reading. On the table in the living room, pressed close together, stood bottles of women's perfume. There were nylon stockings, and in general a lot of different fashionable things that were hard to get at that time. In Strogaliev's notebook there were about 100 numbers of different girls and women. Many of them remained lucky, but some were not so fortunate. Igor Silkin was not an intellectual. He was born into a simple working-class family. In this partnership he obeyed his more educated companion in everything. They committed crimes because they wanted to make money from stolen goods and live large, and at the same time they could have some fun and torment people, all at once. Silkin was found sane and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Strogaliev was treated differently. He was condemned to death. The death penalty which was carried out without delay. And what do you think about this case? Like or dislike the video. Share it with anyone who might be interested. Check out the links below the video. And watch other videos on the channel.